Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're heading to Italy, to a case that honestly still gives me chills.
Yeah.
We're talking about the Monster of Florence.
Ah, yes. The Monster of Florence. A dark chapter in Italian history, no doubt. A series of murders that really gripped the nation and, well, the world for almost 2 decades.
It's a story that's both fascinating and incredibly disturbing. 8 double homicides spanning from 1968 to 1985, all concentrated in the province of Florence. Young couples, brutally murdered in secluded areas. It's the stuff of nightmares.
Absolutely. Each crime scene was more gruesome than the last. The brutality, the precision, the way the victims were, well, it was unlike anything the Italian authorities had seen before.
Right. And what always gets me when I think about this case is the killer's modus operandi, the chilling consistency. It's almost ritualistic, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The monster, as the press dubbed him, he had a very specific way of operating. He always used a .22 Beretta, and the female victims, they were all subjected to a particular kind of mutilation. It was this detail that really set these crimes apart.
Yes, I read about that.
Yeah.
Truly horrifying. It definitely wasn't just about the act of killing. There was something more, something darker at play.
You got it. And to make things even more puzzling, he used these very specific bullets, Winchester bullets, Series H. And this detail, it actually becomes very important later on in the investigation.
Interesting. We'll definitely have to come back to that. But first, I'm curious, where do the investigators even begin with a case as complex and, frankly, as terrifying as this?
Well, in the beginning, they focused on what became known as the Pista Sarda, or the Sardinian connection.
Okay, the Sardinian connection. What's that all about?
So it all starts with a double homicide back in 1968, even before the Monster of Florence was, a thing. The victims were Barbara Lacci and her lover, Antonio LoBianco.
Right, I read about that.
Yeah, so her husband, Stefano Mele, he was convicted of the crime, but during the trial, he started pointing fingers at these two Sardinian immigrants, Salvatore and Francesco Vinci. He claimed that they were involved somehow.
Interesting. So how did this seemingly isolated incident end up being connected to the later Monster of Florence killings?
Well, the thing is, the same Beretta that was used in that 1968 murder, it popped up again in 1974 at the first crime scene officially attributed to the Monster of Florence.
Wow. Okay, so that's a pretty significant link. Tell me more about this Vinci family. What made them stand out as suspects?
Well, the Vinci family, they had a, shall we say, colorful history. Salvatore, in particular, he had a reputation for violence, especially towards women.
Well, that doesn't sound good.
No, not at all. In fact, he was even suspected of being the mastermind behind that 1968 double homicide we were talking about earlier. And there were even whispers that he might have been involved in the death of his own wife, Barbarina, back in Sardinia.
Wow. So this Salvatore Vinci, he sounds like a very dangerous individual. What about Francesco? Was he considered equally suspicious?
Francesco. Well, he was more of a petty criminal, but there were a few things that made him a person of interest. He was seen near some of the Monster of Florence crime scenes, and, well, investigators believe that both he and Antonio Vinci, Salvatore's son, they might have known something about the monster's identity. Maybe they were even protecting someone, possibly a family member.
So for a while there, it seemed like the Pista Sarda, the Sardinian connection, was a promising lead. But it sounds like it didn't really lead to a clear resolution. What happened next in the investigation?
Right. You see, despite the efforts of the investigating magistrate, Mario Rotella, who was really convinced about the Sardinian connection, they just couldn't find that smoking gun, that piece of hard evidence that would, stick. So they had to release the Vinci suspects. Back to square one, and all the while, the pressure was mounting. With every new crime, the public was getting more and more terrified. They needed answers.
So the Sardinian connection fizzles out, and the investigators are back to square one. The pressure must have been enormous to find a new lead, to reassure the public, to offer some hope that this nightmare would end.
Oh, absolutely. The Monster of Florence was becoming this boogeyman, this specter haunting the entire region. And in the midst of all this, the investigation takes a very unexpected turn. They start focusing on this seemingly ordinary guy, a farmer named Pietro Pacciani.
Pietro Pacciani.
Yeah.
Now, this is where the case gets really interesting. At least for me, he was a local farmer living a simple life in the Tuscan countryside. It's hard to picture him as this, meticulous, cold-blooded killer we've been talking about. What led the investigators to him?
Well, believe it or not, it was an anonymous letter. Someone tipped off the police, suggesting they take a closer look at Pacciani. And this, combined with some new developments in criminal profiling and, statistical analysis, it kind of pushed him into the spotlight.
Statistical analysis, that sounds pretty cutting edge for the time. Can you explain a little bit about how that worked?
Sure. So basically, the investigators, they gathered a ton of data about the Monster of Florence case. I'm talking everything from the locations of the crimes to the victims' profiles, the times of the murders, even like the smallest details from the crime scenes. And they fed all this information into this statistical model. They were hoping to find any patterns, any connections, anything that might point them toward the killer.
Fascinating. So they were basically doing an early version of what we'd call big data analysis today.
Yeah.
Did it actually yield any results?
It did, actually. The analysis revealed a bunch of statistical links between Pacciani and the Monster of Florence murders. For instance, his home, it was statistically closer to several of the crime scenes than you would expect, just by chance. And then there were other things, like his history of violence against women. He had actually been convicted of murdering his girlfriend's lover back in the day.
I see. So you have this anonymous tip plus these statistical correlations. That's what put Pietro Pacciani on the map, so to speak.
Hmm.
But was there any physical evidence linking him to the crimes?
There was. During a search of Pacciani's home, they found something pretty incriminating, a single Winchester bullet, Series H. Remember those specific bullets we were discussing?
Oh, right. The ones used by the Monster of Florence. That's a pretty big deal, right? One bullet, but potentially the missing link.
Exactly. And that discovery, along with the statistical analysis and Pacciani's past, it was enough for them to arrest him in 1993.
Wow. After all those years of mystery and fear, the arrest of Pietro Pacciani must have felt like a huge breakthrough, both for the investigators and for the public. Did he confess to the crimes?
He did not. Pacciani, he maintained his innocence throughout the whole thing. Said he had nothing to do with the Monster of Florence. And his trial, which started in 94, it became this media circus, was all over the news. The whole nation was glued to it.
I bet. I mean, this was a case that had haunted Italy for nearly 2 decades. Everyone wanted to see if justice would finally be served. What was the atmosphere like during the trial?
Tense. It was very tense. The courtroom was always packed. Journalists, spectators, and of course the families of the victims, they were all there, hoping for answers, for closure. The prosecution, they built their case on circumstantial evidence. You had the bullet, his history of violence, some witness testimonies placing him near the crime scenes. But there were some holes in their arguments.
What were some of the key arguments made by Pacciani's defense team?
They attacked the reliability of the evidence, basically. They said the bullet could have been planted, and the witness testimonies, they were inconsistent, unreliable. Plus, they argued that the prosecution never established a clear motive. Why would Pacciani do this? And there was no DNA evidence connecting him to the crimes.
It sounds like the defense had some valid points. Were there any other individuals close to Pacciani who provided any insights during the trial?
Yes. Actually, Pacciani's daughters, they testified. And it was pretty harrowing. They described years of abuse at his hands, painted this really grim picture of his character, but they didn't directly connect him to the Monster of Florence murders.
Wow, what a tragic situation. It must have added a whole other layer of complexity to an already complicated trial. So, with all these conflicting accounts and the lack of definitive proof, what was the verdict? What did the jury decide?
Well, after 6 long months, they reached a verdict that shocked a lot of people. Pietro Pacciani was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison.
Guilty. So it seemed like the Monster of Florence case had finally come to an end. Justice had been served, even if it was delayed. But I have a feeling there's more to the story, Res.
Oh, there's definitely more to the story. The conviction of Pacciani, it didn't close the case. Not really. It actually opened up a whole new chapter, one that was even more twisted and confusing.
So we ended the last part with Pietro Pacciani being sentenced to life in prison. It seemed like a resolution, like maybe the Monster of Florence had finally been caught. But you hinted that things weren't so straightforward.
Right. I mean, the verdict, it gave some people a sense of closure, sure. But a lot of folks, they weren't so convinced. They saw Pacciani as a scapegoat. Someone who was convicted based on his personality, his past, more than any hard evidence. The lack of DNA, the shaky witness testimonies, it all just, it fueled the doubt.
So even with a guilty verdict, there was still a lot of unanswered questions. Did Pacciani's lawyers do anything? I mean, did they try to fight the verdict?
Yeah, they filed an appeal right away. They argued that the whole trial was flawed, that there wasn't enough evidence to really prove he was guilty. And while that appeal was going through the courts, something pretty crazy happened, something that added a whole new twist to the case.
This case is full of twists and turns, isn't it? What happened?
You remember Mario Avani, the former postman? We mentioned him briefly earlier. He was a friend of Pacciani's, kind of simple guy with a low IQ. Anyway, during Pacciani's trial, he described himself as Pacciani's compagno di merende, which basically translates to snack companion.
Compagno di merende.
That's an interesting phrase. It sounds almost innocent, but I'm guessing it has a darker meaning in this context.
It does. You see, that phrase, it actually became part of the Italian lexicon after this whole thing. It's used to describe someone who's an accomplice, someone who's involved in something shady, you know?
Snack companion. Wow, what a chilling way to describe someone involved in these horrific crimes. So how did this seemingly unimportant figure, this Mario Vanni, how did he become such a key player in the Monstruo de Florence investigation?
Well, the police, they were trying to strengthen their case against Pacciani, maybe hoping to uncover a bigger network of people involved in the murders, so they decided to look into Vanni a little deeper. And what they found was pretty shocking. Vanni admitted to going with Pacciani on some of his nighttime excursions out in the Tuscan countryside. And get this, he actually confessed to participating in some of the murders.
Hold on, so you're telling me Pacciani wasn't acting alone, that there was at least one other person involved. That changes things. Oh, it definitely changes things, and it doesn't stop there. Vanni's confession, it led them to another guy, Giancarlo Lotti. Lotti, he also had some learning difficulties, and he confessed too. He said he had been involved in several of the murders, along with Pacciani and Vanni. So now the investigators, they had three guys, all connected to each other, all confessing to their roles in the Monstruo de Florence killings. It seemed like a slam dunk.
It's incredible. You have these three individuals, all with their own vulnerabilities, confessing to these brutal crimes.
Yeah.
But what was their motive? Why would they do something like this?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one of the biggest mysteries surrounding the Monstruo de Florence. Some theories suggest that it was just pure sadism,
Huh.
a combination of sexual perversion and some deep-seated psychological issues. Other theories explore the possibility of a satanic cult or maybe some secret society pulling the strings.
Those are some pretty dark theories.
Yeah.
It's hard to even fathom what could drive people to commit such horrific acts. But let's go back to Pacciani. His appeal was still pending while all of this was happening, right?
It was. And then in 1996, in a really unexpected turn of events, the appeals court, they overturned Pacciani's conviction, said there wasn't enough evidence.
Wow. So after all that, all the trials, the investigations, the testimonies, the confessions, Pacciani was a free man.
He was. He went back to his quiet life in the countryside. But the suspicion, it never really went away. He died in 98. Officially, it was a heart attack, but there were rumors of poisoning.
What a bizarre and unsettling end to his story. What about Vanni and Lotti? Did they ever face trial for their alleged involvement?
They did. Despite all the questions surrounding their confessions, they were both tried and convicted for their roles in the Monstruo de Florence killings. They both got life sentences. Lotti died in prison in 2002, and Vanni followed in 2009.
So in the end, we have three men dead Pacciani acquitted, but forever linked to the case, and Vanni and Lotti convicted, but with their confessions still shrouded in mystery. It seems like the true identity of the Monstruo de Florence remains an enigma, a chilling, unsolved case that continues to fascinate and haunt people to this day.
You got it. Officially, the case is still unsolved. Over the years, there have been new theories, new suspects, but nothing concrete, nothing that's been definitively proven. Some people believe that the compagni di merende, they were just pawns in a much bigger, much darker game. Maybe they were protecting someone more powerful, someone with influence.
It's a chilling thought. To think that the person or people behind these murders, they might still be out there somewhere, free. What a truly unsettling and fascinating case. It really makes you think about the darkness that can exist in people's hearts and how difficult it can be to find the truth, even when it seems like it's right there in front of you.
Absolutely. The Monstruo de Florence, it's a reminder that even when you think you have all the answers, there might be more questions lurking beneath the surface. And sometimes, the monsters are harder to catch than we think.
Well, thank you for taking us on this deep dive into the Monstruo de Florence case. It's a story that'll stick with me for a long time.
My pleasure. It's one of those cases that stays with you, It makes you wonder about the nature of evil, the limits of justice.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. We hope you found this deep dive as thought-provoking and as chilling as we did. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and maybe sleep with the lights on.